And I just hit the record button then. If somebody misses a session, or if life is the hectic way it is and you cannot make a session, you can catch up. We encourage you to come to the live sessions because we have lots of interaction, discussion, try and answer questions and the like, but we understand if you have to miss one. So there are a couple of options for you. So I've introduced myself there, and the gentleman next to me in the photo there is Max McArdle. Max is the Senior Project Engineer at Safe System Solutions. And Max has been working in cycling infrastructure for quite a while now. He used to work for the Victorian government and was integral in the $70 million cycling infrastructure package, safer cycling infrastructure from the TAC, which was a few years back now. Does a lot of cycling auditing, cycling infrastructure design, cycling planning work with us at Safe System Solutions. And I work alongside Max and have the absolute pleasure of sometimes getting out there and doing cycling audits or working on cycling infrastructure courses with Max. So Max is going to be your lead for this course. He's going to run through most of the content. I'll be a little bit more in the background. And I've popped Max's contact details there. You're always welcome to follow up with questions about content or discussion points. Sharing relevant bits of information is great. Max likes to add relevant content into the slides. Now, our learning management system is Moodle. So hopefully you've received an email from Safe System Solutions, which gave you access to Moodle. If you didn't get that, maybe check your junk folder, but you're going to need to access Moodle in order to upload your assignments, do the little tests, the quizzes after each module, just to check that you've been paying attention. It's a pretty important part of it. So if you haven't got that, get back in contact with Emma or myself, and we'll work out what's going on there. We're going to cover off this a little bit more at the end of the session, and we'll take you live into Moodle to show you where things are, but just flagging that for now. Now, to keep things interactive, we've got a few tricks up our sleeve. One of the tricks is Wally the Wombat. Wally the Wombat warning sign. And Wally is going to appear a random number of times in each module. And your job is to keep an eye out for Wally and count the number of times Wally appears. So just get a scrap of paper, or I think there was one provided to you, but you can use any scrap of paper. Just keep a track of how many times you see this warning sign in the slide somewhere. This one is not included, so your Wally count is currently 0. So yeah, you'll be asked that at in the quiz at the end. It's one of the quiz questions at the end of each module. Also, to keep you engaged. Oh, sorry, Max, you.
Oh yeah, I was just going to confirm for anyone that's thinking that maybe you can have this running in the background, and when you come to the quiz question, you can just flick through your presentation notes that we provided on the USB. You won't find Wally in the presentation that we provided you in the PDF. So you only see Wally in today's presentation. So that's another way we've tried to make sure that we keep people engaged. So make sure you're counting there.
Thanks, Max. Yes, and another way we try to keep you engaged is by incentivizing you with chances to win prizes. So we have lots of different prizes available for you if you are the first to answer questions correctly that we ask, through the chat. If you ask really wonderful questions or make great comments through the chat, you're a chance to win a prize. Also, if you log into modules a little bit early, you're a chance to win a prize, because we do a little bit of trivia before each session, just in the few minutes before. So incentivize people to log in early, just some trivia. And you might be asking yourself, well, how do I get these prizes? Well, at the end of the session, if you successfully complete everything, you will get a certificate electronically, but you'll also get a certificate in the mail. And if you've collected any prizes along the way, in that pack will come whatever prizes you've won. And the prizes are a whole variety of exciting things like socks and hammers. Oh, we've stopped mailing hammers. They're too expensive to send, but all sorts of exciting stuff. But I mentioned there, like there is a competency benchmark for this course. We actually set a benchmark of requirement there, which is to attend and view all the sessions. And we strongly encourage you to come to the live ones, complete all the set tasks, and the pass mark is 80%. But I wouldn't get too concerned about that, because both Max and I, our objective is to ensure that your competency levels are up to that 80% pass mark, and we will help you and coach you one-on-one and do whatever's required to bring your competency level up to that. You have 3 attempts at everything. And I suggest what you do is have a first crack at it. If you really bomb out and don't do well, then get in contact with us and we'll organise that one-on-one Zoom chat or phone conversation. But at any point throughout the course, you are more than welcome to contact us via email, via phone, and ask questions about the assignment. We really do encourage that. That's the one sort of big downside of that face-to-face is it's harder for us to just check in that you understand, you're comfortable with it. So please do reach out if you're confused at all. We are here to help you through this journey. So before I hand over to Max, I will pause there. I'll let Max set the agenda for this session, but I'll stop sharing now, Max, and I'll give an opportunity for anybody who would like to ask any questions about the logistics, the management, the running of the course. The other thing I should mention is you'll notice in your chat function, you have the ability to talk to the panelists or to everybody. And that's a nice way to, if you want to comment on slides or ask questions you think are relevant, everybody should be seeing this. Use the little arrow, drop down little arrow, and select everybody, and make your comments to everybody, and we can get a good bit of conversation going on in the chat. But feel free to just send it to me if you want to just keep it between us, and I can relay it on to Max. And if you really want to keep it anonymous, you can go to the Q&A and do a completely anonymous comment or question if you really, really want. But let's keep that interaction going. I don't see any questions at this stage, Max, so I think we're good to jump straight into a bit of content.
Fabulous. Thank you, Ken. Thanks for the introduction and getting everything started. I will share my screen to the presentation now, and we'll run through the agenda. So as Ken mentioned, feel free to just jot down any questions that you have throughout this presentation, but hopefully we get to go through all this content and it makes sense first time around, but always feel free to chase up on anything that doesn't quite add up to you or you want to question it. Today for our session, we will be focusing on off-road facilities. So that is predominantly shared paths. We're going to be looking at shared path design, including path widths, gradients, hazards, common hazards that are regularly adjacent to shared path and what we can do within that space. Some sightline requirements, as well as fencing, which is actually a fairly pertinent topic, considering there's lots of fencing adjacent, cycling corridors that are not very cycling friendly. So we'll illustrate some points as to what to install in that space. We'll also discuss shared paths crossing roads and what would be considered best practice within this space. Ability to prioritise cycling movements is certainly seen as more favourable for cycling connectivity as well as safety. Bollards, I'm sure everyone's aware of the vendetta that the cyclist community have against bollards, and we'll discuss exactly what we can do within that space as well to perhaps get some better outcomes, as well as DDA requirements. And the third kind of phase of this particular session will be discussing more about wayfinding and exactly how shared paths interact with other shared paths. So ensuring that you don't get to a point in the road or on the shared path where you're not sure where to go, that you provided adequate signage to ensure that everyone knows where the next destination is, and also managing the cyclist speeds at these conflict points. So we've got a fair bit of content to cover through today, so I am just going to get stuck right into it, and we'll get cracking with shared path design. So here we've got an example of a lovely exclusive bike lane that is along an esplanade here in Melbourne, actually. And this bike lane is, as I mentioned, exclusive, so it's only meant for cycling traffic. However, it is, you know, because it's in a tourist destination and we are humans, and if there's pedestrians there, then you certainly see them using this bike path and walking there, no problem. But the idea is that the cyclists, they cycle in this space here, and pedestrians, they're further along in this space over here, closer to the waterfront. You'll also notice that there's actually dedicated zebra crossing points to try and funnel pedestrians to cross at these key locations. A little bit difficult to see in this photo just because it's a bit far away, but there is a zebra crossing across the cycle path to really formalise this is where we want pedestrians to cross. And if it was a perfect world, that's exactly how it happened, but it's not quite how things really work in the real world. But it is a lovely example of what shared path design can look like, even though this is an exclusive bicycle facility. You've got cyclists, you know, going at one speed. You can use this facility here, and then pedestrians who are much slower, perhaps parents with prams or people with wheelchairs, you can be separated and you can use this facility over here. So I think this is a really nice example. It's a lovely way to ride. We'll hop into path width. This is a diagram that's used in the Austroads Guide to Road Design, part 6A. You'll notice in a lot of these slides that there's a source written down here at the bottom. So if anyone would like to reference these particular figures or anything like that, that's the reason we've recorded that source, just so you're able to double check everything. And if you need to incorporate it in your own guidance, you've got that opportunity to. And all of these sources that we list are provided in your references on the USB or on the Moodle as well. So you've got access to all of these papers. There's a few of them that you don't have access to, but we'll chat to that as we come up to it. So from Austroads Guides, what we see here is we see on the vertical axis, we see the number of pedestrians two-way per peak hour. And on the horizontal axis, number of cyclists two-way per peak hour. So obviously we're focusing on the highest concentration of both pedestrians and cyclists within that hour period. We're looking at those volumes, and that is what can determine the path width that or the type of facility that we provide. So at a high level, what we're looking at here is if we've got relatively, say, middle of the range cycling volumes between 600 and 700 cyclists two-way per peak hour, and low volumes for pedestrians within that space, then a 3-metre shared path, that's perhaps not the best example because that would come out over here, sorry. Then this kind of facility, which is a 3-metre bike path and a 1.5-metre footpath, would be considered most appropriate. Whereas if you're looking at lower pedestrian volume, so let's take it at 25 here, and we look at that 700, then we can see, okay, that's where a 3-metre shared path may be more appropriate. So this is a useful graph to determine exactly what type of facility would be most appropriate given the numbers of peds and cyclists you've got in that space. And this can be a little bit challenging because if you're working within a greenfield space, you won't have this traffic volume, so you won't have these volumes to clearly calculate. It'll be an assumption, or it'll be based on some type of modeling. So it's not a perfect way of doing things, but I think this graph kind of illustrates how it's best to, as you're rising up the chart, you can see as we're getting higher and higher ped numbers and cyclist numbers, what you're looking at is actually providing separate cyclist facilities and separate pedestrian facilities. So similar to that photo that I showed in the last slide, where you've got, here's where the cyclists go, here's where the pedestrians go. If you've got high volumes of both of those road users within the space, then separating those two road users is considered best practice. So that's the real takeaway from this graph. You got to take it with a little grain of salt, a pinch of salt with these things, because they are, they're trying to illustrate a point. But if you've got, 701 cyclists per peak hour, does that shift things from a shared path to a separated facility? There will be some professional judgment required. Another common way that determines path widths in terms of what actual strategic function the cycling corridor is providing. So, for instance, if it's a local access path, which is shown here on the left-hand side, they suggest that a range between 2 and 3 meters is appropriate. I beg to differ in saying that this 2 meter facility, this is potentially even less in this photo here, but you can see 2 people walking side by side, and there's no space at all for cyclists to use that in either direction. So this is not a real fantastic example of what a shared path could look like. Completely understand that there's site constraints and the like, but to sign this as a shared path when it's really not, you really don't have the ability to share between different road users is not an excellent example. These regional paths, or also commonly referred to as commuter paths, they have more of a let's get cyclists here. They're connecting corridors and connecting destinations. They have typically wider paths, so you've got a range between 2.5 to 4, and the desirable minimum width there is 3 meters, which is generally a fairly that's generally the benchmark for these shared use paths. And yeah, you've got a lot more activity happening there with cyclists and to some extent pedestrians. However, the last category here, which is recreational, this is where you've got, you'd expect all road use, the cyclists and pedestrians to be there in relatively high numbers, as well as you may have playgrounds or cafes or things that attract pedestrians to stop and dwell within that space. And that's kind of where you need these wider paths to ensure that the pedestrians are safely protected from cyclists who may be going at high speeds within that space, and they're not, trying to weave in and out of pedestrians. Ken, any questions to start with?
Max, yes, a couple of things have come up. So Wade's made a good point, and I think it's worth just mentioning, and if you've got any comments on it. Wade says, unfortunately, the table provided, they provide the minimum widths and people generally take them as optimal, which is not necessarily what's meant by them. Also, they don't take into account growth or predicted growth. So a bit different to the way cars and roads are treated for traffic, in the sense that they put in scenarios of growth and then design for that. So that was one point. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Max.
I completely agree. It's a common mistake, unfortunately, for engineers and designers within this space to see the desirable minimum and to pick that and think that's exactly where we should be building. That's what we should be aiming for. But that is exactly as it sounds. It's a minimum. We shouldn't be aiming for the minimum. If we're looking at best practice, we should be trying to get at the higher end of that range to ensure that we're providing best quality infrastructure for our community.
Yes, so thanks, Wade, and hello, Wade. And Sam's sort of agreeing with Wade and making some comments about that pole and the width, and it's all very, very narrow there, as you've been talking about. We've got another comment in. Is a physical separator preferred between a path and a bicycle path, so a pedestrian path and a cyclist dedicated path?
It's a good question. So there's certainly the issue there. If you are providing a physical separator between the cyclist path and the pedestrian path adjacent, if you're providing something that can be tripped, something that's actually raised or the like, that may then create additional hazards for those people perhaps with low vision or just not noticing that there's something that they can trip over within that space. So you are potentially creating an additional hazard. But there are other measures to delineate that space. So whether using contrasting, pavement colours or some type of line marking that clearly delineates the two, or different pavers. So, a clear, this is the edge of the two facilities, things like that, rather than a raised physical infrastructure. But then again, within that first photo that we saw there, that was actually using trees as the border there, which I think works quite well. And if you had planted some, low shrubs along there as well to separate the two, that's another means of achieving that.
And nice to get a bit of greenery out there.
That's right. That's right.
And yeah, just another comment there or question around then DDA compliance. So there's a little discussion earlier about what DDA is, the Disability Discrimination Act. So ensuring that everybody of all abilities can use the facilities that are provided. So vision impaired or people with mobility challenges. The DDA for shared path spaces and the challenges that might bring up. I think that could take quite a long time to sort of delve through all of that, Max, but it's, do you agree, it's sort of something to be considered and brings up a few challenges.
Yeah, something that we chat later on in this presentation as well, but it is certainly relevant. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's keep moving on, but wonderful. People have already worked out how to ask the questions and get involved. So please keep those questions coming in.
Fabulous. Okay, so we'll hop into gradients. Typically, the first thing that people consider with gradient is, if you're a cyclist like me and you don't like uphill gradients, this is probably the graph that's most relevant. And it's desirable uphill gradients for ease of cycling. So what it's saying in this space here is there's two kind of curves saying there's an acceptable level and a desirable level that can be provided within this space. And it's saying as the gradient increases, the length of your gradient decreases because you see that curve going down. So in other words, if you're providing a really, really steep incline, like a 10% incline, you only want to be doing that for about 10 meters before that facility is just, it's basically going to be unused, or it's going to be only used by those that are incredibly fit and, they love doing this stuff and they're a bit of a mountain junkie. That's who will be most attracted to that shared path facility. However, if you are providing shared paths, you're most likely catering for cyclists, ages between 8 and 80. That's a common phrase that I'll probably continue throughout these modules. But if you're aiming for the for cyclists within that range, their ability to tackle these really steep gradients is not, it's very, very limited. So that's what this graph is trying to illustrate. But another interesting facet about the gradient also is in reverse. So when we're talking about downhill, which is not always considered quite as intrinsically as the uphill, because uphill you can understand why that's more challenging for a cyclist to pedal up. But downhill gradients, typically steeper than 5%, should not be provided unless it's unavoidable, is the phrase used in the Ostroads. And the reason for that is, so this is an actual example here where we've got a shared path coming down here. You can see it connecting and winding along in this direction. But at the bottom of this shared path is another shared path connection, which is completely hidden by this pedestrian fencing. So I'm trying to draw it there with my little red marker there. So it's just by that tree. And if you see in this second photo, you can see it cropping out here and it connects in with that winding path. So the issue with this downhill gradient is you as a cyclist, and I'm sure anyone that's been on the saddle would love to just go for it down this hill, and to pick up speed, you'll easily reach 40, 50 kilometers per hour by the bottom of that. And that's without pedaling. That's just enjoying good old fashioned gravity do its work. But the issue there is with a cyclist that's coming in that little crossing point there and interacting with the shared path, their ability to see you coming down that hill and your ability to see them entering your shared path is incredibly limited. So you've basically created this conflict point where you've got one cyclist that's traveling at speed, at high speeds, and another one that's entering it, which is not a fantastic outcome. So for this particular example, you can understand, the gradient is perhaps not something that you can solve within this space, being that this is used for an overpass structure. And yes, it's a little bit challenging to make the overpass shorter, it's not going to quite work. But you could look at extending the ramp down to bring that further and further, and therefore reducing the the steepness of that downhill slope. But the other option there is actually bringing the connecting shared path further up where the lines of sights are better. So somewhere about at this point here. And that way you can actually see any other users that want to enter that shared path, and you're not going at such high speeds as well. Ken, any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Max. Just a question around, is line marking essential for a shared path facility?
Yeah, it's not necessarily essential, but it is certainly used fairly frequently, and it's a good way of delineating the two different streams of users there. So ensuring that you're not just getting one cyclist that takes up the central reserve, and also because it kind of resembles the road carriageway, I think there is a little bit of psychology in that to stay within your one lane, so to speak. But there's certainly shared paths which just do not use the continuous line marking there, or the divided line marking.
Thanks, Max. And Wade summed up this one, I think, this picture on screen pretty well, saying can't solve the gradient, but can solve the junction. So
perfect. That's right. Can we get a prize out to Wade? He's answering all my questions so far. It's fantastic.
Good. Right. First prize winner. Plenty more to come, no doubt.
Congratulations, Wade.
New South Wales on the board already.
I'll keep hopping through. Are there any other questions there, Ken? Or?
No, that's it for now, but do keep them coming in, everybody, please.
Fabulous. So in terms of hazards, first, I think it's important to look like what our cyclist envelope actually looks like. And there's a few different guidance illustrations that have slightly different figures, but this is the one that I've picked, which is actually from the New South Wales guidance. So the operating width for a cyclist and a rider is 1 metre. And if you have a look what our width of the handlebars are, it's only 750 mil. So you're actually only providing 250 mil, or actually 125 mil either side of you, that's considered the cycling envelope, which is actually not that much. So Austroads actually recognises that, particularly for cyclists that are heading uphill, you tend to wobble. You go left and right to try to gain a little bit more momentum in your cycling. And so this 1 metre characteristic doesn't quite meet the envelope requirements for cyclists within that space. And so there is likely going to be an update to this envelope to suggest that this should be increased to 1.5 metres. So just a heads up. But currently this is what we use. So a 1 metre operating width for the cyclist and rider. The head clearance is 200 mil. That's quite short. I've seen other literature out there that suggests that should be 0.5 metre. So it depends what guidance there is for particular jurisdictions. They may have different requirements within that space. But that's taken as height above the helmet, which is 2.2 metres is what's referred to there. And the other important facet to note within this diagram is the clearance from walls, or clearance to a hazard. Once again, there's different actual requirements within this space, depending which figure you look at, but between 200 mil, which is very, very, very close, to 500 mil. So 200 mil would only be if you've got a cyclist-friendly feature, such as the cycle-friendly fence. I can understand that, being that close to the edge of the cyclist's operating width. However, I wouldn't be putting, a utility pole 200 millimeters from a cyclist's operating width, because that would not be as forgiving. So we will hop into some common hazards now that we typically see within shared path or just adjacent shared paths. So this is just a classic example of a bin that's kind of been installed on the shared path side, rather than just flipping that around and perhaps putting that in the grass area. But no, that's the way that was installed. We can see here we've got a steep kind of drop off at the edge of the concrete pavement there for the shared use path. And we can chat a little bit more detail about what the best option is there, but I think it's fairly straightforward. If we actually just batter up to that edge of the pavement there and create something like this, it's a much better outcome. Because if you were a cyclist to come off within this space, unless you've got a mountain bike, you're not going to be able to, correct your movement and enter the shared path again. You'll most likely just fall off your bike, which is not ideal. Sorry, Ken, yeah, go for it.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, speaking of mountain bikes there, Andy's just popped in there the sort of different widths of handlebars of different bikes. And certainly, some mountain bikes have quite wide handlebars, and I ride a very compact handlebar setup on my bike. So what those widths, they're sort of taking into account a bit of that range, are they?
Yeah, so it's and as with a lot of the things that we'll discuss today, these figures are definitely taken from a typical kind of cycling point of view, and it's tend to be an average of the general cohort. Another example may be like e-bikes, for that uphill gradient. That's probably not an issue for an e-bike, you know what I mean? Because they can just engage the electronic facility and just cruise up those hills, no problem. So that graph is probably not as relevant. But yeah, these figures are generally taken as an average of all type of cycling.
So another comment, a great comment came in about cargo bikes and the variety of bikes that are out there now, and we're seeing the wonderful use of bikes for different lots and lots of different purposes. Do we sort of think about like a design bike, with road design, how we think of a design vehicle, and we'll have a design vehicle and a checking vehicle when we're ensuring that they can fit around curves and different areas? Is there that sort of thinking? Are we that evolved with bikes yet?
I have seen within conducting a road safety audit for cycling infrastructure, there is a little bit of conversation around what that bicycle should actually look like. And it discusses things like, the width of the tread and the actual tire pressure as well when you're going out there to audit a cycling facility. So there is a little bit of that description available, but I wouldn't say we're quite at the stage as we are with, general traffic movements and knowing that a 15-metre long semi-trailer can turn within this radius and the like. We're not quite there with cycling, but yeah, as you say, there are certainly more than one type of bicycle out there. So yes, it's important to consider how other cyclists may fare within that space.
Yeah, well, we'll know we've made it when Austroads issues the official swept paths for different types of bike.
That's right.
Amazing. All right, thanks, Max. Keep going. You've got lots to cover.
The final hazard that I've just got listed in this picture, just a little bit hidden actually. It's this utility pole, which is right up against this edge of the path here. Certainly also sheltered by the vegetation that's growing over it as well. So it's a little bit difficult to see. And you could imagine if you were a cyclist riding to or into the photo there, if there was another cyclist coming at you, or perhaps another example would be a person walking their dog, and the dog decides to get a little bit too close to you, and you're a cyclist and you try to swerve to avoid it, and you didn't even see that this pole was there. It's not a very forgiving environment, and it's not a very forgiving thing to crash into, that hazard being just a sheer blunt object that's right adjacent to your shared path. So the better that we can offset these hazards or delineate these hazards would be a much better outcome for the cyclists within this space. Because although you can see it, and if I point it out to you, you think, how could a cyclist ever hit that? Well, there's plenty of instances where you as a cyclist are forced to weave in and out, or undertake some emergency swerving. So it does happen. An example here that I've got is of what this delineation could look like to avoid a hazard. So this is an interesting example where this is actually I've forgotten the word, gantry, that's the word. It's a sign gantry that comes up over here, and that is over the road like that. So that's the column there, and the column foundation is being installed very courteously right in the shared path that they decided to build within this facility. I'll just also note that this source, I've also included the Google Maps reference, which will be also fairly common in any of the Google Maps that we use within these presentations. So if you want to have a look at that and have a scroll around while I'm talking about it, feel free to have a click on that and have a look what that looks like. But what they've actually used here is they've used flexible bollards on the edge of the shared path to show that it's narrowing and that there is, you know, a hazard coming up, and basically you are having to get a little bit closer to that hazard. So they've tried to illustrate that there's something to be concerned about within this space. I think there's certainly a better way to have done this. Anyone in the chat wants to mention what else could have been done in this space that perhaps improved the safety for cyclists and avoid hitting the hazard?
We'll give people a second there, but this is an interesting photo here, Max, and it's on one of my commute routes there, and it always annoys me that they put the red and they've swapped the colours around there, which is a very minor little thing associated with the geometric challenges, but like a guidepost, it's like they've changed the colour of the guidepost halfway along. It should be, in my mind, white in the direction we're facing now, and red in the direction that the guy in the high vis is walking in order to conform with our colour scheme for guideposts, which is red on the left and white on the right. But anyway, that's sort of an aside. Here we go. What do we got coming in now? I think we need some sort of barrier system potentially, or lots of stuff coming in now to redirect cyclists away from the hazard, or especially if they're maybe out of control or avoiding something. So potentially some approved cycle fencing. Can the gantry base be protected? It wouldn't stop them hitting it, but maybe reduce the severity, so some cushioning there. I'm just reading. So maybe make some comments on those, and I'll keep reading other ones, because this group is excellent, Max. Lots of ideas and thoughts coming in. I'm struggling to keep up with my reading. I love it.
It's good to hear the use of the term cycle-friendly fencing. So we will discuss that later on in this presentation. But good to hear that that jargon's already been embedded in some of the participants here, because that's certainly an option within this space. If you were to, rather than just provide those flexible bollards, but provide some type of fencing there, so you're more likely to hit the fence, which has got a much improved crash outcome. You hopefully just slide against the fence and continue on your journey, rather than hitting that fixed column, which would hurt a lot if you were to run into that. So any other answers there, Ken?
Well, yeah, a few good sort of thought-provoking comments, which I really like here. So one from Sam talking about, the people designing, building, maintaining, managing, and doing the temporary traffic management, everything like that. Have they actually ridden this? Are they people who ride and understand some of these challenges? And if they did, they might alter their thinking. So that's a good one. So Jason's come up with a really nice way of putting it, is get the design right from the start. And I do like that. This is a fairly new section of road. I don't think that they would ever consider compromising a traffic lane width like this. That is just absolutely unheard of to do anything like that with a traffic lane, or well, not unheard of, but it's very easy to do that. So moving that gantry back further in the first place, which I think is a nice one, and even potentially taking up a little bit of the shoulder width at that location too, in order to keep the shared path facility at an optimal width. So a few different ones there. Yes,
fabulous. I like the parallel you drew there, where if this was a carriageway and you would just happen to plonk in a gantry column at the edge of the traffic lane, or you had to narrow the traffic lane, that wouldn't fly at all, no way. But if it's for cyclists, it doesn't seem to be an issue. As long as you put some flexible bollards there, that should do the trick. I completely agree with the point that let's get it right in the design. If you've got the shared path and you can see exactly the extent of where that's going, overlaying where these gantries are proposed and their foundations, it's not such an incredible exercise when you're actually designing this to just shift that out and put that into batter there, or into the, the sharp face that you've got here, and it's just installing it over there instead of where we've got it. And then you basically remove that hazard altogether. So certainly a better outcome for everyone you've maintained the shared path with, and you've reduced that likelihood of an errant cyclist colliding into it. But some good feedback there. So thanks, Ken, for sharing.
Yeah, and then a bit of commentary and discussion around the practical challenges of sort of these projects and brownfield sites, environmental constraints, cultural heritage constraints. And I think, we don't shy away from that fact. We're sort of trying to get people to, everybody to, genuinely consider cyclists as much as a priority as the vehicles, or taking that into account. Anyway, let's keep moving on.
We'll hop into sightlines. So I've included this equation here for those that are perhaps really into the design details, but this is just to really articulate that there are actual stopping sight lines and stopping sight distances for cyclists. So we have certainly a range of calculations that's for general traffic as well as heavy vehicles. There's also sightline requirements for cyclists as well. So it's the same equation, or very similar equations for general traffic as well. There's just different coefficients and the like used within this space. But the things that you're looking at that influence your sightlines are the speeds, your coefficient of friction. So that's basically how likely you are to stop within that space. So typically 0.16 is used for wet conditions, and that's the worst case scenario. So that's the one that I'd typically go for if I was calculating these, if I was doing these calculations. And obviously the grade of the path as well. So whether you're going uphill or downhill, that will impact on your ability to safely stop within that space. And there's also more equations here if you really want to get into some finer details of whether you'll be able to stop if you sight that hazard within time, or you're going to collide it and hit it. So there's plenty of research out there if you are interested in seeing what you're proposing is going to be a hazard to the cyclist, or there's sufficient sighting distance to note these things. The one that I wanted to discuss is horizontal curves, because it's not always thought about within this space. And a really common example is providing vegetation at the side of the shared path. But if you're providing that along a curve, that vegetation can actually grow in size over the years, and it can be a real hazard for cyclists because you already can't see beyond the curve, and you're introducing this bushy obstruction that blocks your line of sight. Then you're potentially creating a point in the future that cyclists can't see, and if there's a hazard there, then that could be an issue. So I've got an example of what this could actually look like within practice. So you can see this. This is, believe it or not, a shared path. It's not the best that we've ever seen. It is fully sealed, so it doesn't look like it. It looks kind of like gravel, but that is sealed. And if you're a cyclist traveling along and trying to get around this bend, you can see that your line of sight behind there is very limited. And if there were something in your way, it could be a branch, it could be someone that's fallen over, it could be some tacks on the ground or something like that. Your ability to see that hazard is incredibly limited. And, just a simple design thing would be ensuring that all this vegetation is either going to grow at a low level, so it doesn't interfere with your line of sight going around that bend, or offsetting all of that vegetation further away from the edge of the shared path there, so you're not inhibiting sight lines as shown there. Okay, fencing. We've chatted about it already, and it's good to hear the cycle-friendly fencing being brought up. There are some requirements for when fencing is considered necessary, and I'll just run through those. There's two type of examples that they run through within the Austroads Guide. One being where there's actual a vertical drop, which is shown in this first figure here. And just to run through this table here, so a fence is not required where X is less than 2. So in other words, the edge of the path to the drop is less than 2 meters. However, Y is less than 250 mil. The reason they say the fence is not required within that space is that because they're saying, you can see that it's got an asterisk. It says batter off the surface where fall is within 1 meter of the path. In other words, what they're saying is instead of providing a fence, provide this kind of batter like this using, soil or any natural gravel that you've got around in the area, and providing this kind of ramp instead, rather than provide a fence, because that's a better outcome for cyclists. However, where the drop is larger, between 250 mil and 2 meters, a partial barrier fence is required. And if it's greater than 2 meters, a full barrier fence is required. And I will hop into some examples of what those fence types look like. I'll just jump into the other example where we're actually looking at the slope. So that first example was saying about the drop adjacent the shared path. But if you could imagine if you've got a cliff adjacent to your shared path, you'd also want to be providing a cycle fence there, because you don't want cyclists to come off and down the cliff, because that would not be a fantastic outcome. It's saying, once again, the fence is not required if you've got, relatively gentle slopes, which is provided here. And those that are familiar with doing these grades would have seen these type of slope batter limits before. And it's saying a partial barrier fence is required where you've got medium-sized slopes, and a full barrier fence is required where you've got basically cliff right adjacent to your edge of the shared path. So what does our cycle-friendly fencing look like? So I've got the two examples. The first feature that I really want to stress, and it's incredibly important, is this smooth rail. That's common in both of our fence types here. And the reason that this is so critical is there's no kind of, like posts or columns or anything that juts out from the fence. It's all smooth. So in other words, if you were to collide with this fence, the idea is you collide with this smooth rail in between your wrist and your shoulder. So this part of your arm here, you can glide along this smooth rail, and it's more likely to keep you along the edge of the shared path and on the shared path, and also on your bike. If you had, say, a post, or those chain mesh fences, and your handlebar gets stuck in there or something like that, or something gets caught, your handlebars kind of go like this, and your ability to maintain control, say, in your bike, is incredibly limited. So that's why these smooth rails are so important. And I will jump to you in a sec, Ken. I just want to confirm this while I've got it. The partial barrier fence is the one shown on the top, and the full barrier fence is the one shown on the bottom. And you can see that the full barrier fence has these additional vertical members, which basically ensures that nothing can pass through there, no human can fit through there. The top example, potentially you could fall within those gaps, and that's why they're considered as not as high risk as those cliff faces that I was talking about before, where you'd be installing the full barrier fence. Okay.
Okay, a couple of things have come in. First one from Darren in Albury there, and hello to our Albury crew. Directly next to an open table drain, which has a 1 in 4 batter, do you need separation? And is a fence required in that situation?
Okay, so if it's directly adjacent a open drain and a 1 in 4 batter, so let's just say it's between 1 to 5, and that's greater than 3, so it's probably within this category here. Fence not required is what I'm reading there.
Yep.
So hopefully that answers your question there.
Yep. And then if you go back to your next slide there with the photo, and some eagle-eyed people have, especially our Western region of Transport for New South Wales, hot on the fact that the sign there is on the path side of that fence. And I suppose they're thinking about a cyclist sliding along that and striking that pole, and whether that's the best placement of that. So some just natural cycle auditors there. In fact, both of those comments. Jackie got in before Wade on that one.
Can we get a prize out to that one, Ken? Because I've looked at this photo dozens of times, and I've presented this exact slide multiple times, and I have never noticed that was sitting on the shared path side and not on the other side And I think that's a really relevant finding, because if you're providing this smooth rail to hopefully glide along, and you're providing this safe feature, and then to put a fixed hazard, so you're going to collide into that sign, yeah, that's not engineering at its best.
Yes, no, good there, and it sort of probably reinforces why you want different people auditing in independent eyes, or different eyes looking at things. Because Max, you're focused obviously on the type of fence and not sort of thinking wider there. The fence appears to be designed for adults. What about smaller cyclists, kids? Is there any consideration of that within the fencing, cyclist-friendly fencing standards that you're aware of, Max?
Not that I've seen. It's a fairly good point. I would consider, if you would expect very, very high volumes of children cyclists within the area, perhaps an additional smooth rail kind of at this mid-tier height as well, to capture their wrist to shoulder height. But I actually can't say I've actually seen any guidance that would suggest that where that particular infrastructure will be warranted, or any type of merit within that. So it's a good question.
Yep. All right, let's keep moving on. But loving the questions coming in and the commentary.
Sensational. So just a little bit more on the fencing there. So here's a beautiful diagram from the New South Wales guidance paper as well. Longitudinal fences with rounded posts, smooth railings, that's a big tick. But fences or bollards curving towards the rider or sharp points, that's a big no-no. Also low fences, as they've got a hazard at peddling level. So this is sometimes like planter boxes that you may see adjacent a shared path. They can also present a hazard, although they're not striking, the upper torso. You could be colliding with the cyclist pedal, which could also have a destabilizing effect. So something to also consider. Okay. Shared paths crossing roads. So I've got this photo here of an example of a shared path crossing the road. And I'll tell you what, I'll just shift this title down a little bit so we've got a clearer picture there. And Ken, is it possible if we could launch a poll? Because I've got a question for the group that I'd like to ask.
Yep. So poll coming up live now. You're not being marked on this, everybody. It's just one to get your engagement, your thoughts.
Yeah, so, and the question that I'd like everyone to consider is, should fencing be installed along this shared path? So considering all that conversation we just had about shared paths, about whether there's a drop-off adjacent to the shared path or a significant batter that we should be concerned about, do you think fencing should be installed along this shared path? So have a think about it, have a look at the photo. This one used to be on my commute to work before the whole lockdown situation occurred.
What's that? St. George's Road, is it?
St. George's Road, that's correct.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like the fact that they've got that bike counter down the end of that.
Do.
Showing how many bikes live, showing how many bikes have gone through in the day. It's very nice. We've got everybody who has had a vote, so wonderful there. And I'm going to share the results there.
Fabulous. Okay, so I'm seeing that 96%, the majority are saying no, and I would tend to agree that fencing probably not required within this instance. You're most likely to collide with some low-level vegetation, which is probably going to have a fairly negligible effect for a cyclist within that space. And falling onto tan bark or grass is probably not the worst outcome. Albeit there are some, signposts which could be more significant if you were to collide with that. But I think generally within this space, this is probably an instance where you wouldn't really require cycle fencing unless there was a particular risk that was noted by the community or by particular users within that space. Ken, any points?
Oh, yeah, lots of great stuff coming in. There's a bit of discussion around that shared path priority through that intersection, which we're going to talk about in a later module, aren't we?
Oh, yeah. No, it's coming up.
Oh, it's this module next.
It's hot off the press, so that's good stuff.
And then just a bit of dislike for fences when you can have a bit of breakout space for a cyclist to get away from the stray dog or the like, so they're not straight into a fence.
That's right.
And yeah, some commentary around high curbing and those for catching a pedal and the like, which I think was covered in that previous diagram about low fences and curbing, the same sort of thing.
Spot on. Yes. A few other benefits of this particular example. I really like the wayfinding that they've used here. Obviously, it's a little bit difficult to see if you're cycling at speed, but the fact that they've actually got the street name so you know which road you're crossing as you're approaching it. And so if you were looking, to meet up with a friend and you need to turn at Woolton Avenue, you've got that reminder there. It's on the ground, which is, if you're cycling, maybe that's where your line of sight is focused. You could also have, typical signs as well that could be used within that space. But the real benefit within this is the cyclist priority treatment as we're crossing this road. So this is a little bit of a strange environment. It's a divided carriageway. There's trams on either side, and you've got this big median, really, really wide median, where at this instance, there's an opening. So general traffic can cross over within this space. And you'll see there is, well, it's a little bit difficult to see, but there's actually a stop treatment here and a stop treatment here. So in other words, general traffic have to stop and give way to all the users on the shared path, so cyclists and pedestrians. And because that's actually a stop function, it's got a really, it's seen as the higher treatment. It's not just give way, but they physically have to stop left and right, have a look, make sure no one's within that space before crossing over. And then they have to give way again if they're accessing St. George's Road here or that divided carriageway. So what I really like about this, cyclists are given priority. They cycle straight through. They don't need to worry about stopping, giving way to cars, which is fantastic. It's just makes a much better connection for your journey, and a lot less stop-start, which is also more favourable on my legs. And the other real benefit within this instance is it's a little bit difficult to see within this photo, but it's actually raised as well. So it's kind of raised like a wombat crossing. And what that means is, so if a vehicle were not to slow down, if they failed to give way at the stop sign because they didn't see it or they didn't want to or the like, the fact that it's raised means that the operating speed of the vehicle crossing that conflict point will be greatly reduced. So in other words, because you're providing that speed hump, you're bringing vehicle speeds very much down. And the other real benefit of this is if you're raising cyclists up, your ability to actually sight them if you're a motorist crossing over within that space is also improved. So you've got the big tick that you're providing better connectivity for cyclists. You've got better sighting improvements for motorists crossing within that space, and you're also reducing vehicle speeds at this critical conflict point location. So there's lots of ticks in this particular image. Ken, it looks like you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm loving the stuff coming in from this group. Okay, I think some prizes I might give out here while we're on the run. Darren Prize, he's got the eagle eye, noticing that there's no DDA compliance on the road or on that path coming up to the shared path. So it seems to have some random sort of rumble strippy, slip resistance, skid resistance type things. But
yeah.
And one for Simon as well, because Simon's noticed that you're going to get pre-warning for Woolton Avenue on one direction, and you're going to get warning of Woolton Avenue after you've passed it on the other direction, which I thought was a neat little thing to recognise. Maybe there's a spot behind us in this photo where you can turn off.
It's just a reminder of what you've missed out on. That's the way they look at it.
And Choi's made a good comment here. You slipped in the word wombat crossing, which may confuse a little bit people what a wombat crossing is, and maybe a bit tongue-in-cheek asking whether Wally is hiding under that crossing. But no, a wombat crossing, for those who aren't aware of that term, is a raised pedestrian crossing. It's what we term in Australia as a wombat crossing.
Yes, that's right. So it's a similar function within this space. Okay, so let's have a look at some other best practice examples of a shared path crossing roads. So another example here, this is actually at a threshold on the left-hand side here. where we've got a shared path that crosses. Once again, it's raised, which has got the big tick, as I mentioned before. And you can see that there's a give way, and there's also the little supplementary plate to emphasize that it's pedestrians and cyclists within that space, which seems to become a little bit more and more common, providing that supplementary panel. Particularly within Victoria, I'm starting to see it more and more common, as well as using a coloured pavement to clearly delineate the shared path crossing there as well. Fantastic example here. This example here on the right-hand side is actually the Brisbane Bicentennial Bikeway. I do like this example, but I'm not as sold on it as I am on the first one. Could any guesses why, from participants, why I prefer the left-hand example in comparison to the right-hand example? Nothing to do with Brisbane. I love Brisbane.
Okay.
Let me know if any responses come through, Ken.
Yeah, they're coming through. So Jack is talking about the angle. Charlie's talking about the turn radius. Wade's talking about cars approaching from behind on the right one. So all generally in the same in the same way of thinking. Everyone
seems to be infiltrating my mind exactly. All those points are incredibly relevant. If you're a cyclist traveling along here, your ability to, effectively sight a motorist that is hopefully giving way here, but may not necessarily be doing so, is incredibly limited, because you would have to turn right around on the right-hand side to be able to spot them, and your natural momentum will want to continue. So that kind of movement is not fantastic. It probably would be a little bit better to be able to see if we could just straighten up that crossing point a little bit more. So, and it may not be the best outcome for cyclists, in that you are crossing and having to provide a tighter turn radius there, but at least you'll be able to pause and, double check that there's no oncoming traffic there that's going to collide with you. So it's just an example of, two different raised crossings there. Ken?
Max, I got lots of stuff here. You're probably gonna have to tell me to, but it's a really good things to bring up. So Gary, and hello Gary and Kazi. Gary is pointing out that there's only a couple of jurisdictions that don't let cyclists ride across zebra crossings, and Victoria and New South Wales are the ones he points out. And I'll tell you what, it's been bane of my existence for a long time doing road design in Victoria, and having to try to create it would. The fact is, you're kind of designing, cyclists are going to ride over these, yet you've got to create this whole other set facility. So any comments on that?
For me?
Yep.
I also agree. It seems very, very strange that Victoria and New South Wales have adopted this approach, considering we know cyclists are going to cycle across the zebra crossing. I also think that the general traffic, the road community, everyone knows what a zebra crossing is. It's a stop it's a place that you stop, you give way to users within that space. So why not extend that beautiful safety benefit to the cycling community as well? Yes,
I agree. And maybe one of the things we can all as an industry maybe push and lobby along, I think it would save us money, which means we could get more and more facilities out there, and I think that they're going to provide that improvement. Comment on the different colours used there. We've got green on one, we've got yellow on the other. And while you're doing that, also a good point that was there, that give way sign on the right-hand diagram. It's unclear whether that's for the shared path or for the road, really. I would agree. Yep. But the colour,
coloured pavement also depends on jurisdiction, and even sometimes councils like to inject their own personality to these coloured pavements. So there's certainly lots of different colours that I've seen, as well as different patterns that I've seen to emphasise where cyclists should go. At the moment, for shared paths crossing within slip lanes and this type of environment within Victoria, there's guidance to state that it should be that yellow. For Brisbane, this red for the raised part of the Wombat crossing, or the crossing there, is fairly common that I've seen. Using green throughout the cycling conflict points is also, I would say, nationwide. That's considered the most appropriate. you've got conflict points between where a cyclist and a general traffic could collide, that's generally painted green. So yeah, there's plenty of options out there.
Yep. So, and then some practical implications of the idea of cyclists being able to go across zebras is they need to be assessed for sight lines, because the difference in speed on the approach of cyclists compared to pedestrians, and if they've been designed, you know, in that accordance, which I think is a very good point. So you need to do some risk assessing around that. And a few other comments have come in. I think I might let you keep going, and I'll maybe answer a few in the background here or make comments, but do keep them coming in and share them to everybody. I think there's a great discussion in the chat going on.
Good to hear we've got such a vocal, energized group, Ken. Loving to hear it all. I'll hop into bollards now, which are unfortunately quite a common feature on our shared paths and on our cycling corridor network as well. And I'm not going to say that we need to get rid of all of them and they're too much of a hazard that we need to completely eliminate them. I will just start by saying that we should reflect on exactly where we are installing these bollards, because there's plenty that I've seen around, and I think there's no way general traffic could access this particular route where I am. So it leads me to assume that they've installed this bollard for maintenance vehicles, perhaps picking up bins within that area. And I think a better outcome would be ensuring that you're having a conversation with your maintenance companies so that they're not accessing the shared path, rather than putting a bollard, which is a fixed hazard for cyclists every day of the week, as opposed to that once a week, one vehicle that happens to use that space. So I suppose as a point of reference, I tend to start and think, okay, is the bollard actually required within this space, or are there other means that we can perhaps mitigate that risk? So anyway, I tend to get a bit passionate about this, so sorry. But there's a few examples of different bollards that we've got here. This is just a painted white with a little bit of hazard tape. That's not going to do a lot in low light conditions. We've got these silver ones that blend in perfectly with the adjacent bluestone pavement, which is also not fantastic, because you've got a bollard, which is a hazard for cyclists. You really want to make it as clear as possible that that hazard is there. So that's not a good example at all. This third example, you can see we've got, one of them have got these reflective strips, which they do a reasonably good job in low light conditions. Why there's only installed out of one of the three, I'm not entirely sure, but that's what we've got there. A few more examples that I've got, timber bollards with vegetation growing up out of it, which is doing an even better job of hiding the hazard there. These chicane type of treatments, fairly common, particularly on rail trails and the like, as well as this last one's actually in Tasmania, where you're using some kind of U-shaped sign to act as a chicane. And yeah, I suppose in all these daytime conditions, fairly obvious, you can see them, but you could also imagine if it was low light, or perhaps there's a cyclist in front of you that is blocking sight lines of that particular hazard, and you can't see it, and you decide to overtake that cyclist, and then next thing you know, you're colliding into a bollard. So it's not a fantastic experience. It's something that can clip your pedal, something that can clip your front tire, and would likely result in you falling off your bicycle. So the reason that I talk about it, oops, sorry.
What speed are we expecting cyclists to be in these areas? And maybe the page before, I think, was also referred to. What sort of speed do you think cyclists?
Yeah, so within this space, within shared paths, I think it's safe to assume cyclists can go to speeds of 20 to 30 kilometres per hour. If you're a commuter cyclist, that sounds probably a little bit slow. Maybe you're travelling a little bit faster if you're on road facilities, but generally those speeds are not too challenging to hit. And if you were hitting, a fixed hazard at 30 kilometres per hour, you can certainly know that you will feel that, as well as any of the following crashes that may occur, which I'll hop into now, because I've actually got an example here of a bollard that was installed on a very, very popular commuter cycling route in Melbourne. which is this bollard here. You can see it's certainly been struck several times, and it's not doing the best of its capacity of being seen and being conspicuous. And this is what it looked like after this gentleman here actually crashed into it. So the council went out there, they gave it a fresh paint job. You can see the spray paint markings there on the ground, and they also put some new reflective tape on it. The reason I include this in the presentation is this fellow here collided into the bollard as it was looking like that on the left-hand side. And he suffered 3 broken bones in his wrists, as well as facial injuries, and called the ambulance. And while waiting for the ambulance to arrive, he witnessed 2 other riders hit the same bollard within that space. So people regularly overlook just how negligible these bollards can be, but they do hurt cyclists, and they can cause serious injury to cyclists. And it could be enough to stop this gentleman from going to work, from being able to pick up the groceries, to contribute to society. Could be enough for him to never cycle again, and to then, you basically put off a cyclist from operating within this space, which is a really tragic outcome. So while we're on the topic, well, what can we actually do? Because I understand that we do need to ensure that we aren't having passenger vehicles accessing shared paths. If you do want to block off that access, typically what's considered best practice is to using something that's similar to this treatment here, which is using some type of landscaping within the middle here, and just ensuring that that landscaping isn't going to get too big and bushy and going to create a hazard in itself. But and using these deflections to separate the opposing oncoming road users within that space as well. So I've got to say, these treatments are not that common. The bollard is certainly the predominant way to address this. I do have an example of what this could look like, and you will see that there are bollards in this photo. However, the way that they've actually designed this particular entrance is fairly good, in that it's very, very well delineated. You can see the 2 legs here. So this is for, pedestrian cyclists that way, pedestrian cyclists traveling that way. And these bollards also, they incorporate a light in them as well. So in low light conditions, they activate, and you can actually see them at night time as well. So this is a much better outcome, as well as having this grassed area, just to further separate the 2, or further separate road users from that direct hazard. Ken?
We've just got about 12 minutes to go, Max, just flagging that.
No, I'm nearly done. I might just rush through these last slides, and then I'll let you I'll hand it over to you and Moodle.
Thank you.
Thank you for ringing the bell. DDA requirements, as was discussed earlier on. So we do have a requirement to include tactile ground surface indicators. It says that they may need to be installed on the footpath where the bicycle path has the priority to comply with the DDA Act. So those TGSIs, for those that are familiar, the little tactile ground indicators, we do see them as being required. So in that example before that someone picked up, that should have been installed across the priority crossing there, I would agree. And I think that we should be installing them for our DDA community. So very, very good pickup. Okay, I will do this because I love doing this, Ken. So I know this might take a little bit of time, but I want to ask the group, what's wrong with this photo? So let's have a look here. What we've got, we can see we've got a very, very confused cyclist here. But what have we actually got here? We've got a shared path crossing another shared path, and I'd love to hear from the group what they would consider. Well, what's going on? What's really wrong with this photo? So if we've got time, Ken, let's jump into it. Let's see if we've got any feedback.
Oh, there's so much going on here. We've got a bit of discussion about speed zoning bike areas, and I'm making comment that that's sort of a last resort if you can avoid that, because some cyclists are going to go fast. Bit of discussion about enforcement of those sort of things, and Irene rightly pointing out there what has been some enforcement in the Docklands area, and also South Bank area. I know there's been enforcement of that. So we've got some answers here on this one. No clear right of way, no right of way. So Dan's popped that in. no wayfinding, priority issues, no wayfinding. So generally along those lines. You want to give any prizes away there?
I think that's all spot on, Ken. So maybe to the first person that commented on the wayfinding, because that is certainly going to be the next topic that we're discussing here. But yes, certainly assigning a priority. So determining which is the priority movement here. So perhaps it's cyclists traveling to the right-hand side in this instance, and then creating some kind of stop or give way treatment. So one leg has the right of way and it's not just a free for all. Sorry, Ken, did I interrupt?
No, exactly. I was just going to clarify that. So, yep, Dan, Jesse getting prizes there, and lots of support for that. So that is good. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah,
and plenty of others got in there. They just weren't as quick. So
you can see this general fork arrangement. It does not communicate to cyclists who should be giving way to who, and what will end up happening is cyclists just go through and hope for the best, and all relying on the other cyclists to give way, which is not a good outcome. So instead, clearly articulating who should be giving way to who within that space is certainly a good way to go about it. But, sorry, I got something of my own. Also providing the wayfinding within this space, as I touched on earlier in this module, is incredibly essential and something that's really, really overlooked on Australian cycling corridors, I've certainly noted. It's so important that Austroads have actually done a separate report on it. So bicycle wayfinding, you can have a flick through that if you want to get some ideas of how that can look. But the important thing to consider is you're highlighting key destinations. So it could be this way to the train station, this way to the shopping centre, or something like that. You're highlighting, key generators where cyclists would likely be travelling, as well as communicating to cyclists that they're staying on the route that they started on. So in that instance where it forks off, perhaps one of those routes was a creek trail, the other was a rail trail, clearly indicating to cyclists as they approach to that intersection, this is where you go for your creek, this is where you go for your rail, and not having that point where you've gone halfway down the creek trail and you realise, oh, I can see water now, I meant to see a train station, and then having to go back and do it all again. So it's really about communicating that early on and, trying to limit that frustration and once again, improve the connectivity of cyclists' journey. We've got a few examples in the international space, which tend to do it a lot better than us, to be honest. So this one is from the Netherlands and this one here is from Denmark. They use blue for their cycling corridors. They just apply it everywhere, which is pretty good to see. And you can see that they also use a numbering system. So number 2 route goes that way, number 6 route goes that way. And same with the Netherlands, lots of different numbers there. So they can clearly, instead of having to, remember long trail names like the Bicentennial Bikeway in Brisbane, you could instead say route number 3, which runs from the city to the airport. That's where this goes. And it's just another way of clearly articulating that. So it's not something that I think we do a fantastic job within the Australian context, but there is literature out there and there's other examples that we can do within this space. And it's generally seen as an afterthought within these examples. But I think what's most critical is along a route. So if you are designing a shared path, from A to B, as long as you're keeping that signage consistently and you're keeping the messaging consistently within that route, I think that's a key takeaway here. Another thing to consider is if you are bringing 2 cycle routes and crossing them over or crossing with pedestrian paths, how do you actually manage the cyclist speeds at this crossing point? So I've got this example here where it's actually at City West Station in Perth, where you've got the shared path running along this train line and pedestrians cross over in this kind of direction. And you can imagine once the train has just departed and there's lots of pedestrians waiting to cross over this area here, it gets incredibly busy. And so having cyclists, gunning through there and traveling at those 20 to 30 kilometre speeds, you don't really want pedestrians walking over within that space. So they've provided this little bit of a splitter island and give way and just trying to articulate that there are pedestrians crossing within that space, which would probably have some effect. I've also seen this kind of pavement marking, just to reiterate to cyclists to slow down where there's pedestrians crossing, but probably not going to be the be all and end all. It's one way of communicating it. Another really perhaps more effective method would be to raise this up. So you've got a pedestrian crossing point that's raised, and that would physically slow down cyclists.
Would you recommend a different colour there for the pedestrian path, or is that trying to warn that cyclists could be there? Or
I'm one of those practitioners that tend to vote for colour changes. I think colours really do a really good job of articulating that something's changing, that there's something you need to note of, that there's a hazard or something that's, you need to be aware of. So yes, I could certainly see that working within this space would get people's attention. Okay, and that's the end of today's session. As I close on this image here, which clearly shows a shared path just ending abruptly, so too does this presentation. I'm going to pass on to Ken, who's going to show you through our Moodle platform and just touch on a little bit of what is required for our next session, and also some out of session work that we've got for you to do. Ken's already taken control. That was impressive. I didn't have to do anything.
That's it, Max. No time to spare here. So there's other questions and things that have popped up. We didn't get quite to everybody. Maybe, Max, you can read that one from Irene that's just come in. Wade's made some good points about safe system speeds and the vulnerability of cyclists hitting objects, which I think is a great thought starter there, trying to bring it back to biomechanical tolerable energies of force, and also commenting on where you've got the some of those route signages. So this is Moodle. For those who have not been in there, as I say, you've got to get your access to Moodle. If you don't have it, you need to get in contact with us, because you're going to need to go in there. Yours looks a little bit different. Oh, sorry, I'll just turn off editing there. I'm in the back end at the moment. Yours will look a little bit different, but it's same stuff. Introduce yourself. It's a nice way to see who's on the course, meet some others. This is how you can access the webinar if you need to. There's some resources here. We've got lots of documents in there. Max has been referring to a few of them, some course info. Anything that you would like to share with others, you can pop into this folder as well. And then each module has some different, the different slides from that module. And then you'll see the quiz here, and you're going to have to do the quiz. So you just click on that multiple choice quiz. Just on some of the content from today and asking the Wally question. But also you've got this 360-degree video, and this is exciting because in your pack, you'll have got the 360-degree goggles. So you get your phone, you put it into that, you put it on, and it's like you'll be on the bike. And so you'll be able to then look around and you'll see the different route. So this one, it's static at the moment, and there's Max and I coming in, giving you some instructions. But if we jump a bit down the track, oh, there we are. I'll jump a bit further down. Hopefully we'll get to some of the cycling. You'll be on the bike looking at some different facilities. Here we go. And Max, tomorrow, next module, will be asking you which of these facilities you prefer. So you can scan around on the desktop if you want, going over the facilities, or if you want to try the immersive VR 360 with your phone, see how that works. Make sure you get your lens, your convex lenses the right way around, otherwise it'll certainly go very loopy on you. But at the start of the next session, am I right, Max, you'll be asking for people to give feedback on which route they like best, what were some of the key features, and what did they find interesting?
Correct, yes. So if you can certainly review that footage prior to Thursday, that would be fantastic. Is that way we can get stuck into that question?
Yep. So there's instructions in there on how to put your goggles together, to put your phone in. You might have some challenges. You've got an extra big phone. But the idea is then that as you move your phone around, it's like being on the bike. You'll see it. You'll feel a little bit of what it's like to ride some of these facilities. And yeah, we've got a couple of facilities. Max and I have a chat to you at the start there, a bit of an introduction, so you can practice looking around. And but you can do that from a desktop. and just scan around with your mouse if you're having trouble getting the VR goggles to work. Right, we've hit right on the half hour there, Max. So I think we are having to close up. We may catch up on anything at the start of the next session that we weren't able to cover off in this session, but thank you for your wonderful interactive participation. Thank you, Max, and we look forward. Is the quiz open yet? If it's not, I'm going to get in there and open it pretty quickly. It should be. Yeah, but thank you, Max, and we'll see everybody next module in 2 days' time.
That's right. See you all Thursday. Thanks for the great participation so far.
Get in contact if you need. Thanks. Bye.